Hello and welcome to the Zolly Mumsel podcast with Magali
and Hansini, where we have thought-provoking conversations about journeys, lifestyles, and just being absolute boss babes.
So, hi guys, this is our first guest actually on the podcast. So we welcome Nida. So Nida, give us a bit of background about yourself, just sort of like a snapshot and all that good stuff.
So my name's obviously Nida. I'm 19. I'm currently a second year student at the LSE studying sociology. I'm from East London. And I'm the founder and writer of Nidagoodread.
Nice. And that's actually how we sort of got in touch, because I saw you on LinkedIn. And I really liked that you started your own sort of writing platform. And when I looked at sort of the topics that short articles you've written, I think that topics really resonated with me. So then I reached out to you to write a piece for us, and that's sort of how met really.
How did a Nidagoodread come about? Like, what was the concept? How did you actually start it?
So with the name specifically, people use my name a lot and made fun of it. So when I thought of this idea during lockdown, like, oh, I should probably start writing, I thought I could really capitalize on this. And so I basically, so it's like, to make it personal, I basically went on my private story on Snapchat and I was like, guys, I actually need help with a name. And then someone popped up and they said, Nidagoodread. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Yeah. So shout out to her. She knows who she is. That is how the name came up. And in terms of the concept, so I had like a passion to speak on topics, but I didn't know how to direct it. And then I knew that I also loved writing essays on particular topics that I was interested about. And so I just sort of combined the two. And I sort of combined the two and then came up with Nidagoodread. So yeah.
How did you think of what topics or how you would put out the content? As in, did you have sort of like a mind, like, did you have kind of like a brainstorming session, like just thought about, because I feel like a lot of times when you're saying, okay, you really like writing essays, but the one thing I really liked about your page is that it's quite digestible for people. It's not too clunky to the point that it's kind of like, what the hell am I reading? It's really digestible. So did you intend for it to be like that? Because that's the kind of reading you enjoy doing?
Yeah. So one thing that I noticed is that like a lot of the reading is not available to everyone to understand. And one major thing that I wanted to make sure I was doing when writing is to write as simple as possible, because these topics affect a lot of people. But I need to make sure that people actually understand what I'm writing. I don't want to have some jargon like scholars usually do. So writing as simply as possible. And in terms of the topics that I choose, a lot of things sort of play into account. So for example, like the area that I live in and like the certain issues that are relevant in my area, I find interesting or I find need talking about. And also, because obviously I'm a uni student, I don't devote my life to researching. So I don't sort of know everything about every single topic. So that sort of narrows down what I write about, because I can't research. So like the topics that I talk about, I want to make sure I am able to research and I know enough on. So that tends to narrow down what I write about as well. Yeah.
Have you ever had this moment where you think, oh, I don't know enough about this, so I'm not going to write about it, and then you kind of go back and forth? Because like you mentioned, a lot of things that you talk about, you research, right? But where do you get to a point where you think, oh, I know quite a bit about this, that people would be interested, people would get something out of it?
I feel like a lot of my articles are very passion led. So when I get to a point where I feel like I've understood this and I have like a connection to it in terms of like, I have a main drive that I'm going to write in this article, that's when I know, because I don't usually write articles that are just explaining things. Like there's a lot of like you hear me in it, if that makes sense.
I was gonna say that you can literally, through sort of reading the piece, you can hear like your passion for
your
it.
Voice. You
can literally hear your voice through it and sort of your emotions when you write the piece. And that's a really good thing, because you sort of come across like you understand where the writer's coming from and why you're talking about.
While you were doing this, what has kept you going? Like, what has been your motivation throughout it?
So I guess like my friends, as in like the first time I wrote my first article, I was very, very nervous because I was never exposed to that kind of format. But my friends definitely helped me going in terms of like, one, as in motivating me, but two is also in that I'm actually educating people, because I thought, you know, with the people that surround me, they have the same mindset as me, and I'm not particularly exposed to like the races in society, so it's like I'm not able to directly educate them. But also they did like tell me, like, Nida, the things that you talk about, they're particularly educating. So in terms of that, that's definitely kept me going, the idea that I'm educating those around me, even if they have the same mindset as me. And also in general, like, passion to like keep talking about these topics, I think, in general, because if I don't do it, then who else will? That's the kind of mindset I'm having.
Yeah.
And so it's like, if I have this skill to write, then I think I should be able to utilize it in any way I can. So that definitely keeps me going as well.
Yeah, I really like that you said that, because a lot of times I think a lot of us think about these topics and want to do something about it, but we don't necessarily have like the skills to execute it. But yeah, hearing that, you know, you're good at writing and you're actually using it to do something and educate is what is that really good.
It's a conversation starter. So a lot of times you just talk about these things socially. Like, we're kind of learning something new with every piece that you write. And then also it's sort of like a puzzle, right? We can have a conversation, we have our opinions socially, but then when we read an article that's digestible, it kind of makes it like you get a broader picture more than you would if you would just have a conversation. So I think, yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, because that's why I say, like, the topics that I talk about, they're topics that come out of discussions and topics that come out of things of social media, like Twitter. So you wouldn't necessarily find like an article that speaks specifically about it. So that's one thing I like to bring to the table, in terms of like bringing articles that are centered around discussions that are happening like right now.
No, definitely. So I think that sort of nicely moves on to the next bit, talking about your past pieces and sort of touching upon them. I really want to sort of dive into the piece you wrote about the like school curriculum. The piece is called An Isolating and Alienating Ethnocentric Curriculum. So sort of give us the background and like overall thought of that piece.
So the idea of the piece came about when I was in first year, and I found that like what I was studying was quite boring, in the sense that it was very traditional and it sort of related to A level. And I was thinking, like, I'm really at uni, why am I not learning something that's beyond like the white founders of sociology? And so it got me thinking. And also one event triggered, my sister came home and they were learning about slavery, and the homework she was given was, why is slavery beneficial to the UK? And I was just like, if she learned that, because we went to the same school, and I was like, if she learned that, then I definitely learned that. But I don't remember learning that, because like right now it's triggered such an emotional response. But at that time, it's like, with children, we put trust in the teachers to teach us things that they think is important. So they were really telling us that, you know, you should know why slavery is beneficial, but we shouldn't know like the horrific nature of it and the effects that it's had today. So that definitely triggered me to write this essay, and obviously do a little bit more research into the national curriculum as a whole being very isolating and alienating. Because obviously you learn that in A levels, but when you experience it, it's different. So yeah, that definitely triggered. And the idea of the article basically splits into two. So the first, it addresses the lack of diversity in the curriculum and within the teaching, and the lack of diversity in the events that are taught. So let's say if they do focus on Black history, i.e. slavery, which mostly is most of the time, it's often focused on the positive aspects, when obviously it shouldn't be, and it should focus on especially its effects in contemporary society. So one thing with history is that it often emphasizes that, oh, these things are in the past, like they have absolutely no effect in our society today. And that sort of tells us like, okay, so I should never, you know, I shouldn't think about these kind of things as something to do in contemporary society. And then the other half of the essay talks about the lack of revolutionary events. So whenever we're taught of, I don't know, like abolition or revolutionary, if we are, it's very dumbed down into the idea that, you know, like this would never happen in contemporary society, you know, and even if they tried, it didn't work well, etc. So like, yeah, the article tries to talk basically around that.
Yeah. No, but that's literally, you know, the bit about what your sister about the slavery question. I literally
Yeah.
read that, and then I was literally thinking back, like, I must have probably had that same question as well, but you
Yeah.
literally don't think about it. And I read that and I was like, to be fair, me and Hans have talked about this before, you know, this idea that we literally need a reform in the whole educational system, because that's one problem with it, but there's also, you know, other issues as well within the education system.
You said something about when your sister came home and you realize what you learnt. And I think the most, not annoying, but it's infuriating when you realize you learnt this and you grew up with this, because
Yeah.
like you said, you reflect back on what you learnt. But
Mhm.
at that point, you didn't have the knowledge to speak up about it. So you're kind of being taught it amongst your peers, and you're accepting it until you grow up and you realize this isn't the case. But the thing is, the people around you, because this topic doesn't affect them, they just carry on believing that. And I think that's where the issue kind of lies in, because they don't get to see the other side of the coin, because we're not taught it. Like you said, the curriculum definitely needs like
A whole reform.
it needs
Yeah.
a reform, but I think it also needs input from people that it's being
That
spoken
no,
about.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like all the
Yeah.
history that that's literally that they get taught should be taught, you know, by people who've actually, you know, experienced or who have a personal touch to it.
No, I was just gonna say, especially in uni, like in first year, when we were taught like anything to do with intersectionalism, it was often like the last slide of the presentation. Like it was just like a little add-on to the lecture, and it like that needs to change, because intersectional sort of makes up the ground of social theory and how we understand our world. Like everybody should be adopting an intersectional lens, because if they don't, then they're missing out on such important things. And the fact that most of the time it was just like that last slide where if you want to do it you can, if you don't, you don't have to. It's just a bit like, it's just a bit problematic for me.
Just to sort of give the listeners, like you mentioned intersection, so can you sort of give a explanation as to what
So
you mean
it's,
by that?
yeah, so intersectional, it basically means like the combination, like you don't look at a social characteristic by itself. So let's say race, you don't look at race by itself. You look at race as intertwined with class and gender, or like maybe 2 at a time or 3 at a time. But yeah.
Actually, I was going to ask, what are things that we can do now, like people in our generation, to kind of bring about reform? Yes, it's one thing to say the educational system needs a revamp, but we're not, the day-to-day person can't make that change, right?
Yeah.
But the one thing I realized we can do is, like we spoke about, because we have younger siblings or one day we'll have children, there are changes that we need to be in mind of. What are things we can do, let's say now, for us, for younger people?
Yeah, no, yeah. So I guess in terms of like what your younger siblings learn, there's always the freedom to like go out there and research online. And sort of one thing we can do is like outsource to other articles or like other books that we think can facilitate in like our younger siblings education. And I thought another thing could be very simple, just like ask them like, what have you learned in school today? And like when I do that with my siblings, I see like if they've learned something that's very big or that I think that they need extra info on, then I can sort of be that medium to like give them that extra information. Yeah.
I think from what you're saying, like it's actually really true. Like we can really complement and be that medium. But the one thing I found challenging from personal experience is my sister actually, she's on TikTok, and she came across the really horrendous video of George Floyd. And she asked me about it. And it's such a big question, because it's like, you don't want to, it's a big topic. I don't know, as in, I do know about it, but I don't feel like I'm qualified enough to kind of distribute that information. So you're just trying to figure out your best to explain something so big. And then I started asking people for like, oh, does anyone have any resource for children? Because if I explain something to you, you'd get it, right? But to children, it's a completely different mindset. Because then she was asking me, but why would people do this? Like, but like she just didn't understand it. And I was like, how do I talk about racism to an 8-year-old child? You've never had to kind of dilute it down. So I think, yeah, you're right. Like we definitely need like some sort of resource outside, and we need to look into these resources. Because one thing I realized is either I'm not looking for them, or I'm not looking in the right place for those kind of resources.
Or I think like like time is moving too quickly, as in like technological advancements and social media has become so desensitized that like children are viewing these things before we can even stop that.
Yeah.
And so like we're just trying to catch up.
Don't you think it's crazy that, you know, at this time we don't have the resources, you know, to give that to our kids? And it's like I'm not saying they should be expected to learn that in school, because obviously, you know, there's only so much you can learn in school, but it's like that should be one of the things that they should be taught, or how to deal with it, or when you come across it, how to talk about it with your kids. Or maybe the parents need to have training.
I think that experience made me realize it is really our responsibility to kind of educate our kids, because it's like you said, there's so much you can learn from school, but it's also the fact that I remember seeing this thing on social media where someone was like, let's say it's a white family, it is everyone's responsibility to teach them about these things, because then there are other kids who are actually going through these experiences and they don't have a choice of whether to educate themselves or to not. So I think as best as we can, you're just trying to, I guess, figure out the resources. Fair enough, like I couldn't find the resource, but I'm sure it starts a conversation, right? We need to find that kind of resource.
And even like within primary, secondary schools, like there's a tendency to like sort of blur the realness of racism. So like I've heard like they teach you like racism no longer exists, or like if it does, it's very minuscule. And it's just
God, that anchors me.
I know. And it's like you're teaching these children, especially if there's like ethnic children in there, that you're teaching them like racism no longer exists. And that's very, very problematic. And like if we're talking about reform in the education system, as well as us trying to do something, because obviously it needs to be both ways, there needs to be strong reform and sort of a change in how we're teaching these sensitive topics. And like it shouldn't be acceptable to just say like racism no longer exists to a couple of children who might have definitely experienced something in their life.
I was gonna because I was gonna say, like, I have friends that their siblings are still experiencing it. You know, they're in primary school, and like it's still a real thing.
Yeah. The sort of mindset, you can say, starts from early, you know, when they're exposed to these attitudes, and it can happen from simple things in the playground, like, oh, I don't want to play with you, or like these very, very little things. And because they go unnoticed and unchallenged, like it just develops into greater, bigger ideas when they're older.
Because I think, speaking from experience, like I didn't actually like go through like a lot of like racist things in my life, but I think it sort of stemmed a little bit. It sort of came out a little bit when sort of like applying for jobs or anything like that, because going into like interviews, I always felt like I was the lesser person. So that's sort of, I think with a lot of people, that sort of that stays with them, like without knowing like where it stems from. But like you said, like it starts from when we're young and we don't realize it, but it actually does affect you, and it can come out much later.
Yeah, because like you're saying, like it's like you're walking into a room where you're the odd one out, and that's where the complex kind of develops. But definitely, like for these kids who are going through these things, whichever way it is, but you know, whether you're ethnic or you're not ethnic, whatever it is, you don't realize the consequences of it until you're much older, and then you realize what you go through. Because how do you expect an 8 or 9 year old either way to understand the concept of racism? Like you can't. Like how do you, like, even if your child, for example, is, I don't know, Asian or black or whatever, you can't, it's really hard to even explain to them the like what you're experiencing is because of this, and they don't realize it until much later anyway.
Society is like currently trying to understand like the racism, but there also needs to be greater understanding of the effects of it and sort of the trauma that these people go through. So like, for example, if we talk specifically like in the classroom, you know, when when children are having sort of outbursts of strange behavior or ADHD, when in reality it's just the effects of the racism in the classroom that can be through teacher labeling or whatever, and then that leads to the exclusion of a student. So like I'm doing research on exclusion, and a lot of it comes from the racism, and their children, the fact that they're being fed the idea that, you know, racism doesn't exist, they have no one to talk to when they go through these things, because they don't understand what's happening. And so when they're labeled as kids with ADHD and therefore they should be excluded, it's just such ignorance to like what they're going through, and the inability to understand like this is a child and you need to pay some attention to
To
what
their
they're saying.
needs.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and understand sort of where they're coming from and why they are, why they're the way they are.
Do you think sometimes the work that we do or the conversations that we have, like for example, Mags and I working on this, or Nida, you're working on your project, do you think it's as a result of us trying to kind of mediate what we experienced in a way? So like from our personal experiences, we're basically bridging that gap.
Yeah, I think like personal experiences will always play a part in what we're writing and what we decide to discuss, because obviously we don't want the same things to happen to other people. And especially like when you vision your work in the future, you want to say like, I want this to have an impact for the generations to come and for my children's children. And it's like,
Yeah.
because the society we live in is so complicated and there's so much going on, that like we have this need to change things for the future.
Yeah, no, I'll literally pick that up as well, because I think one thing that scares me is like, when I have kids in the future, what do I want their upbringing to look like? Like, what do I want, society to be when they're growing up, and like their education, because education is at the heart of everything. That's where it starts.
Yeah.
And that's when they get they form their ideas, their personalities, their characteristics, and that's where
Definitely.
they like form fears as well, and like you said, trauma. And that is
Yeah.
one thing I struggle with, because it's like I want my kids to live in a good society, but realistically like it's really hard, and there's a lot to be done.
And it's a
Yeah.
lot of responsibility at home as well, I think. As we said, yes, a lot of it is at school, but then also it's like a big thing on your head
Yeah.
to kind of to execute well, because you're kind
Yeah.
of are bringing up the next generation. But
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And like education, like you said, it creates sort of attitudes. So like one idea, like when we're taught British values, for example, I remember being taught like democracy, and there's probably one about togetherness or something, I really can't remember. Exactly. No, as in like when you really step out of that environment, that learning environment, you really see like, why were we taught that? Because it's really not true. Like, for example, democracy, like if you're in a constituency where it's Tory majority and your Labour vote doesn't really count, because at the end of the day, the vote is going to go to the other party. So like these very small things, these very small problems with the voting system as well as democracy as a whole, like, do we really have a say in our politics? Like, is there really a party that
Yeah.
stands for us? There's so many issues with the British values, and that like I just sort of think like when I was learning it, I didn't know this stuff before, because obviously we're submersed into an environment where like everything you're taught is true and everything you're taught really happens in society. So it's like, yeah, it sort of creates like this ignorance that defines British society. Yeah,
No, definitely. And what really annoys me is that a lot of people are ignorant to it. They don't actually know their own history, but they're just brought up with those values that they were taught in school, and that's what they've taken on board.
Yeah.
But it's not true. I feel like we're just literally like so passionate about this. But I know it's an amazing, really great article that you wrote, and it
Thank
really
you.
got me thinking. So the next topic I wanted to talk about was the article that you wrote about peace. And there's a bit where you say society will live to see peace. I think that was a really good article, and I wanted to sort of discuss that a bit further. So could you give a bit of background on that, please?
So I wrote this piece when, we were in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement and there was a lot going on. And I saw like we were all surrounded by these events that were happening, and everyone was like sort of wanting to research more, and like we were hoping for change. So like amidst all of that happening, I sort of sat back and I thought, like, what are we looking for? Like, what do we want to see in the future? And I thought, like, what is our drive that is making us, start all this research, etc. So I wanted to write a piece, sort of reflected that, and I basically wrote out what I was hoping to see. as a result of all of this work. But obviously I wanted to emphasize, like, this is not going to happen overnight, or like we're not going to achieve this next year. Like, this is going to be a very, very long project, because essentially we're reversing history of discrimination,
decade, century,
you know, effects of a colonialism, and like there's just so much that we're trying to uncover and even learn about, because like we said before, education doesn't teach you everything, so there's a lot that we don't even know that we have to reverse the effects of. So yeah, Peace was just sort of, I was hoping that when people read it, that they would sort of see like why they're doing the work that they're doing, and sort of give everyone sort of the base as to what we're looking for in the future.
So that's basically what I took from it, was that we all want like a peaceful society. Like, we all want a great society where everyone's working together and it's like harmonious. And but what I struggle with is like, is that ever possible? Is that
possible?
Is that achievable?
Yeah, so like that's one of the things that I struggle with as well, because it's like we're doing so much work, but you know, these events keep on happening, and like you think, can I, as myself doing what I'm doing, really make an impactful change? But I guess one thing that we have to hold on to is like the idea of hope, and sort of the idea that hopefully as a society we will come together and sort of work as hard as we can to reverse the effects of what are happening. And because I get it, like especially when I'm writing, I'm thinking like, you know, should I keep on writing this article, or should I be one to publish this and think that it will, I don't know, change a couple minds, because that's what I was struggling with when I was starting the platform. Like, am I really gonna educate enough people? Because obviously, like I said before, the people that were in my circle, like they had the same mindset as me. So it's like, in terms of when you're doing this work, you want to envision at least what you want to see in the future, even though it might not be as attainable in the short term. You want to envision it because that's what you're working towards. And when you're working this hard, you have to have hope, because then without hope is sort of just a task you're not really engaged with. But it's like you just have to have hope that you sort of achieve a version of what you want to see in the time coming.
I think it can get really overwhelming. Sometimes you think, like you said, all the work that we're doing, is it really mounting up to anything? But it's kind of like, what else would you do? You have a sense of responsibility towards the future to kind of put your, you know, make some sort of effort. It's not really about how much you do. It's about kind of, you're making that step, you're doing it, no matter how big, how small. You know, an article can spark a conversation, and it's a big thing. So I think it's just about us doing our piece towards what we want to see in our own ways, and not comparing ourselves to kind of, oh, you know, but I can't make this change, because in a way everyone can make a change in their own field, in their own industry. Like Mags, I think you spoke about earlier, the fact that when you walked into an interview you felt inferior, to realize that you're putting yourself in that position so that people coming in, like grads in a few years, can see someone like you interviewing them. And that's the change that you're making. No matter what field you're in, there is always something for you to do.
Exactly, yeah. There's so many things that are happening right now that you can see that there's change happening. So like, personal example, like with my friends, they're creating their own businesses and etc. Like they have that entrepreneurial spirit that shows like we're really about to make change here, not just in society but for ourselves, and redefine what it means to be an ethnic minority, to be an Asian person, to be a Black person, like to defy the statistics. And that small form, or big form really, of change is what my article talks about as well. So like the big changes and the small changes as well. And I think it's definitely easier to approach the situation by envisioning your own personal change and how you think that will impact society. And then you never know like the knock-on effects of that. So
definitely. Because I feel like if we just look at our own personal experiences, we didn't grow up with a lot of mentors or role models in the fields that we're stepping into now. So even that change, choosing to do that subject, choosing to go into that field, it's a big thing, because, you know, like you're basically saying to younger people right now, it's possible for you to go into this. This is an option for you. So like you said, even the entrepreneurs that are now defying the statistics, it kind of means it's possible. Because when we were growing up, like how many entrepreneurs did you see? Like, you know,
especially like our age. Really interesting piece, and it's good to hear like your perspective on it. And it's like we do need to have hope, because otherwise it can get very depressing. Because when you think about, because I remember, you know, when everything was sort of happening, well, it's still happening now, but it was when it was literally at its peak. There were times where like I should be working, but I literally could not focus. Because it's like you feel helpless. It's like you want to do something, but you can't. For the future generation, like, you know, they'll experience some change. It will take a long time, but as long as we do our bit, it will trickle down to the generations to come.
Yeah, and I think like even if you're not doing direct community work, like even you working in your position, that's making change, because you're saying to other people like this is possible, and that is definitely a form of change that we want to see.
When you step into space and you see someone ahead of you, like a couple of years, that looks like you and most likely has had similar experiences to you, it makes you feel like, okay, in a way there's a path for me here. It's very small, but it's kind of like, oh, okay, you do belong here, as opposed to you walk in a room and there's no one that looks like you, or even you can relate to. So I think that in a way you are making a difference.
Definitely.
Okay, I have a couple of questions about Nidagoodread. In terms of what are your plans for it? Because I'm sure when you started, like, what were your plans for it when you started it versus how has that changed?
When I started, it was sort of a way to see like how I could direct my passion into something productive, because I knew like I felt like I wanted to make change, but I wasn't sure how I was going to do that. So definitely that was one of the driving passions towards Nidagoodread. And right now it's definitely the same thing, like wanting to educate as many people as I can with my work, and also adapting the way that I do so, because I found that like people who like simple things, like people want to watch videos or like people want to read, like there's a difference in the way that people want to educate themselves. So that's definitely true. Yeah, so it's about accommodating to those different needs, because like traditional research is basically just reading a lot of long words and maybe things that you probably don't understand. So in terms of Nidagoodread, it's a way to like change that and sort of bring work that is easy to understand and therefore is easy to talk about, is easy to ensure that you can make change with. So yeah, that's definitely like a vision for my platform. Yeah.
Have you got plans of any, I don't know, like next year, like another small goal, big goal for the platform? As in, is that what you're working on?
I definitely want to bring like, so maybe a YouTube channel or like an animated video series, because right now it's a bit techie. Yeah, it's a bit techie because I'm trying to understand how to work it. But definitely like trying to bring another side to Nidagoodread where it's more interactive and more visual, definitely. Yeah, so trying to bring that. Maybe I want to introduce like research. So like I said, I want to research exclusion, especially in Newham. So definitely bring a side of research to Nidagoodread where I'm able to, as well as talk about things, bring in like research that I've done myself. And maybe some things with publishing, I'm not sure, but like that's definitely like a lot. I know.
It's no, but
it's got to go for it.
Yeah, I was gonna say
yeah, it's a very long-term goal, but I'm hoping like I can do something with that.
No, and we're literally gonna support you throughout.
Rooting, because I think your work is so important, because you know, like we was talking about earlier, like when we read these things, it just makes you understand it in a much better way to then be able to explain it to someone else. Because sometimes when we're like, okay, let's say someone asked you a question about this, about your experience, it's really hard to kind of put it into words. So for you to be able to read something, it's like, oh, okay, this makes sense to me, you know? But okay, interesting. And what's your favorite author / book? What do you enjoy reading?
So I used to read a lot of like fiction. That was before uni. Then uni started and I was exposed to like a whole area and a whole wide range of scholars and, you know, like books that I could read. So I started getting into more like educational books. And right now I'm just reading around a lot of topics that I think are interesting. Yeah, so I think because of that, I don't have a favorite book. Like, I haven't read something that said like, this is definitely the book that I would say has been my favorite. But I do have a favorite quote by Edward Said, and he says, texts are not finished objects. And I think that very well talks about my work. Like, I've written the article as a text, but it's not finished there. We're able to have conversations about it. We're able to bring life to the article. We're able to envision what we want to see from the article, able to physically see what change we want to see. So the idea that texts are not finished objects, it kind of just represents my work as a whole.
Yeah, I guess it fuels you, and it literally stands for like what you're doing. No, I really like that, because it's true. Because we can write something or like, you know, talk about something, but unless you do something about it actively, then it's like, what's the point, sort of?
Yeah.
I like that.
So you're in second year now, Nida, right? Do you find your work that you do complements your uni work, or do you find that it's completely different? Like, how do you manage, really?
So second year uni, I think because the topics are a lot more diverse, it definitely complements like what topics I'm going to talk about, or it may inform me on what to read in order to write the articles. So it definitely complements it. But obviously second year uni is a bit coming for my neck. In terms of timing, I'm gonna have to sort that out, because uni is definitely taking up a lot more time than I thought. I usually get like an hour every day to sort of do some planning. So hopefully like I can organize some time where I'm able to just do it all in one, and then I'm ready to be active again. Because right now I haven't been very active, but yeah, I'm just getting used to second year. So
yeah, but I think it's about kind of every time you've got a new challenge, it's about restabilizing.
Thank you for, you know, answering all the questions that we had. Like,
yeah, thank you so much for jumping on.
Yeah, definitely learned a lot
me.
and gotten your perspective and, you know, different perspectives. I think we covered quite a lot.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a really nice opportunity to talk about my articles. So,
yeah, no, we really enjoyed it. But yeah, so if people were sort of to reach out to you, how can they get hold of you? Like, what's the best way?
So definitely my Instagram at Nidagoodread. So NIDA then Goodread. And also my email, which is on the Insta. Like, it's a little tab that says email. So you could definitely email me there.
Thank you for listening to this episode.
We hope you enjoyed our content, and don't forget to check us out on Instagram at zolly.mamzelle to keep up to date with our latest ventures.
Wishing you a wonderful day. Here's to you keeping your head up and winning. Lots of love, hands and mags.